So, 9 billion people in the world projected to be living here in 2050. 3% of these 9 billion people will be migrants. That is the current trend, and there's no indication that this will diminish in the future. Now, these are a lot of people, because if you would put these 3% of the world's population into one country, it would actually form the fifth most populated country in the world. So many of these people on the move are parents. Parents who either by force or by choice have left their children in the country of origin, in their home country, while they migrate in search for a better future for themselves, but also importantly, for their children. Now, we know quite a lot about what migration does in terms of whether it contributes to economic development in the countries where migrants come from. For example, with all of the money that migrants send back home, it's been found that this helps people to move out of poverty. We also know quite a lot about what migration does in the host country economies and how migrants contribute to the growth of the economies in the countries where they go to. But what we don't know much about is what happens to families and family relationships when migration leads families to live separately, apart, in different countries of the world. So you might ask, well, why don't we know much about this? That's because usually when we talk about migration, we think about migration as an economic issue. So we ask questions. Are migrants contributing to their home country economies? Are migrants contributing to economic growth in the new countries where they move to? But we don't ask questions about family relationships. These are, of course, important questions about development, about economic growth. But if you think about it, the family is really the basic unit of society. And with healthy and good functioning families, you can reach development or you can have economic growth. With ill-functioning families, that's a much more difficult objective to reach. So now you might be wondering how widespread is such a phenomenon of families not living together because of migration. Well, let me just give you some recent statistics. 1 billion children in Sri Lanka are living without their mother because their mother has migrated. 27% of all children in the Philippines are living without their mother, their father, or both because of migration. In Moldova, this is 35%. In Ghana, this has been documented to be as high as 44%. So this is a huge phenomenon that we're talking about. And from the perspective of the migrant countries where they come from the host country, the home countries, an important question is, are these children growing up okay? Because if they're not, then we're starting to find maybe some possible negative consequences of migration. But also from the perspective of the receiving countries, that is countries, for example, in Western Europe or in North America that receive these migrant parents, we might ask ourselves, is there anything we can do to ensure that these children are growing up okay? Why should we be concerned with this? Well, I can give you 3 possible reasons. First of all, just purely from an own national perspective, if migrant workers are in well-functioning families, they can also be much better workers. They can perform better at their job. They can do what they have to do much better. But also maybe from an ethical perspective. If these people are coming into our countries and provide needed labor, and because often they're not migrating with their children because of the policies in our countries that make it difficult for families to migrate together, then at the very least we might be concerned and thinking about how can we contribute to making the situation for families who are forced to live apart at least a bit better. But also, the well-being of youth and children in any country is actually a global issue and should concern us all in terms of globally, what does this mean? Because disgruntled youth can lead to conflict and instability anywhere in the world. So let me come back to the original question. How are these children growing up in the home countries when their parents migrate? Now, this is something that we at Maastricht University, together with other universities around the world, have been looking at specifically for the case where African migrants are moving to Europe. We're interested in this group because African migrants are a large group of what is called the new migrations into Europe. So it's important to know something about them. Now, let me start with the good news. We've actually found that children do not necessarily suffer if their parents migrate overseas in terms of their emotional well-being, also in terms of their educational performance. So this is very good news because it means that migration doesn't necessarily lead to worse outcomes for children in developing countries. But there have to be 3 conditions present. And these 3 conditions are, first, you need to have stability of the person who's taking care of the children. That is, the children should not be hopping from home to home. They should have one stable home and one stable caregiver. A second condition is that there have to be some basic resources in order to ensure the basics for the children. So, for example, food and shelter, but also some money to be able to pay for school fees, for school books, and also to pay for any hospital or medical bills should these arise. And the third condition is that there has to be some sustained contact with the migrant parent. And this can happen with today's information and communication technologies through Skype or even through the cell phone. And a lot of parents do this. But, and here's the catch, there also has to be some face-to-face contact. So that means that children need to be able to, at least once a year or once every 2 years, be able to actually physically see their parents. Now, the point is that not all children are able to meet these conditions. And here's the bad news. What we find is that those children who are not able to meet these conditions are actually having parents who are facing very difficult situations in Europe, meaning that certain European policies are contributing to making these children not grow up well. What we found is that when parents earn too low an income, so they're not able to send money back to their families and to their children, and when parents are undocumented, so it makes it so that they're not able to travel back to see their children and they're not able to bring their children over for visits. These are the conditions that lead to children not being able to grow up well. And these are the conditions that do not enable the parents to meet the emotional needs and the educational needs of their children back home. So, but here's the bottom line. We can actually do something about this, because what creates these conditions amongst migrant parents, the fact that they're earning very low income and the fact that they're, for a large part, undocumented, has everything to do with policies in Europe. These have to do with visa policies. It has to do with the policies that affect migrant integration into the labor market, as well as the recognition of their qualifications that allow them to operate here in our labor market at levels of the skills that they're bringing in. So, if we could develop policies that would allow parents to travel back home to see their children every once in a while, or to have their children come here for example, summer visits during the summer vacations, or if we could develop policies that would enable migrants to perform better and at the skills level within our own labor markets, then we would actually be contributing to making healthier families and better conditions for both the children as well as the parents. You could think of, for example, temporary work visas for parents that would enable them to travel back and forth, or even specific visas for minors that would allow children to come here for short-term visits. You could also think of more flexible schemes for recognizing the qualifications of migrants than we currently have, or some work training programs especially targeted for migrant workers in order to allow them to receive additional training on the job in order to bring up their skills on par with local diplomas. Now, these are things that our own policymakers can be thinking about in terms of how to develop these policies, and things that folks like you and I could support them in, because this would lead to healthier families in which children overseas are actually growing up well, and it would lead to workers who are in our own economies that are better able to function as workers, but at the same time they're able to fulfill their roles as parents at a distance. And so in this way we would be making our own small contribution to making this a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Give her a big hand.